Okay. The first question that I have concerning teaching is, what should the teacher's main concern be for teaching composition, say, to an inexperienced composition student?
The main concern?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think it's very difficult to summarize it all in a sentence.
Yeah.
I suppose the main concern is to make the student realize actually what he has done, what the music does represent, to what extent the form is convincing or not convincing, and the melodic content interesting enough to warrant development or not interesting enough. In other words, to look at it and see it as if somebody else had written it, to be sufficiently detached to be able to judge it from the standpoint of a well-trained musician.
Yeah. Okay, the next question is, you have probably had many opportunities to go into the teaching field. There are also many composers that do teach. Is there any particular reason why you prefer to lecture and write musical criticism than teach?
Well, the main reason was that I was using whatever activities I did follow for the sake of making a living. And I found that I could earn a living faster by talking to 200 students at once on one evening a week than if I had to take each of them separately. So I fell into the habit of talking to audiences rather than talking to a single student, except at Tanglewood, where I spent 25 summers, of course. So there are a lot of young composers who say they studied with me, and they did, but they forget to say for 2 months.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. What influence did your teachers have upon you as a composer? What influences or influence did your teachers have upon you as a composer?
Well, I would say the main influence would have been that of Nadia Boulanger. My teacher that I had in New York for 4 years taught me the basics of music, the harmonic basis, the rhythmic basis, and formal basis. But I really did free composition with Nadia Boulanger for 3 years in Paris, and that, of course, was a wonderfully lucky chance, because in the books it says that I went to Paris to study with Nadia Boulanger, and the truth is, when I went to Paris, I never heard of Nadia Boulanger, and I didn't know who I was going to study with.
Yeah.
So that was one of those strokes of luck that you can't underestimate.
Okay, say you said that you've taught, say, for 25 years for 2 months of the year each year. Now, say in teaching or many different composition students, how did you preserve their individuality and keep all of them from writing, say, in the same mold, say, all come out all sounding like Copland?
Well, you can't do very much about that. I mean, if they don't have a style of their own, they're going to imitate somebody, usually. It might be, in my day, it used to be Stravinsky, or if you're more modernly inclined, maybe Schoenberg. But I don't think that's very important in the work of a young person, because you assume that later on, as he matures, he's going to find his own style.
Yeah.
It's important that whatever he does is really professionally well done within whatever style he happens to adopt.
Okay. What courses in music theory do you think a composition, say, student in composition should have? Which ones do you feel are the most important, and why?
I don't know what you mean by music theory.
Okay, we're talking about what
music theory is the
okay.
It has to do with harmony, the harmonic structure.
Okay, we say harmony, form, and analysis.
What do I think is most important?
Yes.
I think they're all equally important, but it's you can't really analyze, for example, elaborate work unless you have a firm foundation in harmony, because you wouldn't know how to sort of music is spelled, so to speak. So that I think that a complete musical education is extremely valuable to a composer. Some of them have been able to manage without it, but not many.
Yeah. Okay, this is pertaining to when you were back in your, say, your wild days, as you called them, in Paris. What was a session with Nathalie Boulanger like? I mean, what did you do? What did you derive from a session or, say, a lesson with her?
Well, her principal value as a teacher was just her sheer musical instinct. I mean, a student doesn't come in normally with a whole finished piece. It's supposed to be there from first note to last. You work in terms of sections of pieces, of ideas that may be turned into a piece or used in a piece. She had a way of sensing out, feeling out for you the various possibilities that might happen as a result of the little bit you brought in. She didn't dictate and say it should go this way, but she was it could this way or that way or the other way and tell you why.
Yeah.
And then it was up to you to make your own decisions. It was mainly her actual musical instinct, which was so reliable. Also, in the 20s, she was very with it as far as the musical style goes. Not all teachers in those days approved of Stravinsky and Schoenberg. They thought they were wild men and writing crazy harmonies and rhythms. You see.
Yeah.
And Boulanger just took it in stride. She wasn't bothered. In fact, she liked it. And that was a big difference between her teaching and the man I had worked with in New York for 4 years. He's a little bit forgotten about because of the famous statue of Boulanger. Reuben Goldmark was a good musician, except he was very conventional in his musical tastes. And I'd bring him in something, and he'd look at it for 3 minutes, and he'd say, oh, let me see your exercise. I couldn't get much out of him that way.
Yeah.
But he did give me a firm foundation in the normal harmonies and rhythms and forms of music. What's the university again?
University of Florida.
Florida.
Yeah. Okay.
Down there, isn't it?
You got it.
They brought up a statue to the man who invented air conditioning.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Okay, so in your talks at Harvard and Tanglewood, what was the main focus of your lectures? What was the main idea behind it?
I didn't have any main focus. I've talked mostly to either well-trained musicians. I mean, they were students, but they had good basic training and were almost ready to set out on their own. So it was, especially at Tanglewood, where I spent 25 summers. Yeah. I must have had maybe 6 students a summer. Well, that adds up to a lot of students.
Yeah, that's true.
So a lot of the youngsters have said they studied composition with me, which is true, but they forget to add the 2 months.
2 months.
But I used to have stimulating summers because of that. I enjoyed working with youngsters and discussing musical things with them. So I wouldn't have wanted that not to have happened.
Yeah. Okay, many critics acknowledge the fact that your music has had a great influence upon composers. Julia Smith states in her book that your influence of teaching has not equaled the influence of your work. Why do you think this is a true statement, or if not, what are your feelings about that?
Whether it's true or not, I would say it'd be very hard to really test whether it was true or not. Who's going to go around and find out? Actually, no.
Yeah.
That's more or less a guess on her part.
Yeah. Well, do you feel that that your music has had a great influence upon young composers?
I don't know if I'd use the word great. I'd say it's had a considerable influence on some of the young composers.
Yeah. Okay.
No, in other words, those who are interested are very interested. Those who aren't interested generally aren't interested at all for reasons of their own.
Yeah. When looking at a new work from a student, say new work that a student has just presented to you for the first time, could you outline the things that you would look for? And a statement that Julia Smith said you made in your book was that, in her book, that you look for originality in a new work, something different, something new. Could you elaborate upon the things that you would look for in a work like that?
No, it's very difficult to do that because, after all, when you look at a student's work, you react to what you see on the page. I wouldn't want to outline in advance those things that he should have in his piece. I mean, it's too limiting.
Yeah.
He's really, if he's mature enough, he's basically on his own as a composer. And if he's made mistakes, then his friends who are knowledgeable in music will be quick to tell him about it. Something's too short or too long, or the harmony's not convincing, or the rhythm isn't well notated, or whatever it might be. So that it's a great help, I think, for a young composer, even the most gifted of them, to show their work to some experienced and older composer, who has to be, of course, sympathetic to the style that the younger composer is working in. See, when I studied with Ruben Goldmark, for instance, he had no sympathy for the new music of Stravinsky and Schoenberg. That was all wild stuff, and I couldn't show him anything that had unconventional harmonies in and get him to react. He'd look at the page, say nothing for 2 minutes, and then close it and say, "Let me see the exercise you brought in."
Now, here's a very delicate question, and I want you to think about it before you answer, because I have to phrase this just right. I realize that you do not write your music for, say, students like myself to analyze, but do you feel that the study of your symphonies can be helpful to a theory of composition student? And if so,
I
why?
certainly do. Sure.
Why?
I would think any composer's work, which the composer himself feels is logically constructed and well varied and rhythmically interesting, he would normally think, well, other younger composers ought to be able to profit by a close study of what I've done.
Okay.
You may be mistaken, but it's a normal reaction a composer would have.
Okay, several composers are not proficient on any instrument. In general, do you think that a composer should be able to play some musical instrument well?
Well, I think it's a help.
Yeah.
It's obviously not absolutely essential, since there have been composers who couldn't play their own works. I always was able to play basically, not completely, but basically what I wrote at the piano, in a piano version, if you like. And I rather marvel at guys who can write whole pieces without ever touching an instrument and be convinced that they know what it's going to sound like in advance.
Okay, the next set of questions that I have deal with your symphonies. I have some of the scores, if we need to refer back to some particular aspect of it. In some of your symphonies, for example, the dance symphony, the second movement, and the blues section of the second movement of the first symphony, there's a strong feeling of polytonality. Was this due to the sound of what you heard, or was there due to some theoretical or planned basis? Was it planned, or did you were just acting on what you heard?
No, I mean, it wouldn't be any good to just plan it coldly like that, because you mightn't get a result that would be of any musical interest to anybody.
Yeah.
No, it has to be a spontaneous reaction to the sort of music you're hearing around you. In the 20s, the new music was really quite new. It was seemed fresh and different, and rhythmically more exciting, and more daring, more challenging to the performer and to the composer. So that all that obviously influences a composer. It depends on what period he's living in, what the development of music is in that time, and so forth. A lot of things come into play.
Now, is there any particular reason why you did not use any percussion in your short symphony?
I didn't.
No.
Well, if there is, I've forgotten what it was.
No percussion at
There
all.
isn't one bang on anything?
Nope.
I'll be darned.
Even instrumentation shows it.
Thank you very much. Nothing. Oh, what do you mean there's no percussion? This is my first symphony.
Oh, okay. Wait a minute. Short symphony. Excuse me. My eyes are failing me here.
Well, I'll be darned. That seems very odd. Completely forgot that.
Okay.
Hey, he's coming with some
Okay.
cake of some sort. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Thank you very much.
Thanks for it.
Okay. Kind of wets your thirst on a long afternoon here.
I don't know what it's meant to be exactly. It's vaguely tea. If you'd like some sugar, we could get some.
No, this is fine.
Okay.
This is fine. Okay. Some of the movements of your symphonies do not have a, say, readily apparent classical form. Did you feel a need or an attempt to not cast these pieces in a classical mode, or did you just plan it different? Did you want them in a classical mode, or were you looking for a different type of form or something?
Well, I mean, I grew up in the 20th century when the whole rhythmic and structural character of the music people were writing was different from the formats.
Yeah.
Rhythmically, it was much freer, much more varied, much more daring,
Yeah.
even, I'd say, for that time. And it's only natural for a young composer to be doing the latest thing and not just writing like Beethoven wrote 100 years before. So that it was in the air. I mean, the rhythms had taken on a new excitement once Stravinsky began, once his music began to be known. It was more difficult to play than Beethoven, rhythmically speaking, and more lively, more daring, more fresh, more whatever you want to say. And we were all very aware of that aspect of his music, so it was...
So he's in the forms just kind of took shape after the rhythm and everything. Everything was different and varied.
Sure.
In Julia Smith's book, this is probably the last time I referred to a book, she refers to some of the movements of your symphonies as being in free form. Is there any such thing as free form? And if so, what would it be?
The absence of strict form.
It seems that though whenever she gets to a tough movement, she'll say
says
free form.
Huh?
Right. And I'm sitting there, I'm looking all over every place. Have you ever heard that term before? Did you ever have any
Free
contact?
form?
Yeah, any contact with it?
Well, I suppose the phrase is known. Anything that isn't written in strict form would, by definition, be written in a free form.
Okay.
But modern composers of our own time would normally be less restricted in their notions of what they had to do formally than the older composers who didn't go through for that whole period of seeing formal structure freed, so to speak, from the more classical models that were in fashion.
I might have to take the school out for this. In the second movement of your second symphony, you used the quarter tone. Was this a way of shifting tone centers before beginning another? Why was it used? I mean, that's the first time I've heard of it being used I've observed it being used in your symphonies. And you only did it once.
Only once?
Only
well,
once.
I don't know. It must have been that sort of a mood that day.
Let's see. Was there any attempt to use this quarter tone as a jazz inflection?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Were there any significant reasons for the quote of the fanfare of the common man in your third symphony? So was it autobiographical? Were you looking back over all the things you had done and putting them all together, or was it programmatic? The use of that quote in that symphony.
Well, I mean, you're trying to give it more significance, I think, than it deserves. There must be many examples of composers using some bit from some earlier work and incorporating it into a later work. I don't remember exactly how I happened to have the idea of using that fanfare in my Third Symphony, but I think it was a wise choice. It gave me the opportunity to free it, to develop it and make it seem more imposing.
What, this is probably beginning the general questions now. It's only about 4 of those. What attracted you to jazz?
What?
What attracted you to jazz? What about jazz that intrigued you? Was it rhythm?
Well, 2 things. Well, the rhythm, of course, primarily. It seemed very fresh and different, lively, and, exciting. And the other thing was that it was definitely recognizable as the product of America. And my desire to write music that could be recognizably American was in front of my mind in the 20s. I had spent 3 years in Paris as a student. In France, you become very aware of the Frenchness of French music by comparison with the Germanness of German music.
That's right.
And so I thought, well, the jazz boys proved in America that they could write a music that the whole world would recognize as American. Why can't we do it in the field of so-called classical music?
This is one from my field. Is there any particular reason why you did not write only one band piece, which was Emblems? And there was arrangement of your Appalachian Spring for band. It was arrangement out. I can't think of the name of it right now. That came out as arrangement for band to play. But is there any particular reason why you only wrote one band piece?
Well, I suppose the reason is that I never had any close connection with a band or a band leader. I suppose if I had been asked more often to write for band, I probably would have. But I was getting offers to write for symphony orchestra. I knew the symphony orchestra much more intimately than I knew the band, so it's only natural I wrote for symphony orchestra.
This is a long one. At the time you were studying with Boulanger, it is my understanding that she was very interested in the music of Stravinsky. As you said, very interested in the music of Stravinsky, like you said before. Would it be correct to assume that some of your melodic structures, polytone tendencies, and rhythm devices came from an understanding of Stravinsky's music from your work with Boulanger?
Well, I wouldn't connect the two things as connected with my work with Boulanger. That wasn't essential because we were very aware of Stravinsky. When I was a student, he was right there, living in the same town. I saw him walking down the street one day, and I thought, "My God, that's Stravinsky in the flesh." So he was the hottest thing around, really, in the early 20s, and it was only natural that a young composer from America wanting to write the latest thing would be influenced by the guy who was sort of the leader of the new school, so to speak.
Let's see. Now, were there any other French composers from the 20s whose work became important to you, besides, say, Stravinsky?
Well, the whole French school, I think, as a school, was Ravel and Debussy and Roussel. They all seemed to have a fresh... The fact that it was different from the German music of the 19th century, clearly different, and the sonorities were fresher and the forms were different. It just made music seem less conventional than the real German classics. And of course the fact that I lived for 3 years in Paris.